Welcome to the Vigg Archive. Today we're exploring one of history's most debated figures, Christopher Columbus. For centuries, Columbus was celebrated as a courageous explorer who connected Europe and the Americas. More recently, historians and the public have taken a closer look at his actions, particularly his treatment of the indigenous peoples he encountered. So, was Columbus a hero, a villain, or something more complicated? To answer that question, we need to examine both his accomplishments and the consequences of his voyages. In the late 1400s, Europeans were searching for faster trade routes to Asia. Valuable goods like spices, silk, and precious metals were in high demand, but traveling overland was slow, expensive, and often dangerous. Christopher Columbus believed that by sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean, he could reach Asia more quickly. Most scholars at the time understood that the Earth was round, but Columbus badly miscalculated its size. Even so, Spain agreed to finance his expedition, hoping to gain a commercial advantage over its rivals. In August 1492, Columbus left Spain with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. After more than 2 months at sea, land was sighted on October 12, 1492, in what is now the Bahamas. Columbus believed he had reached islands near Asia, but he had actually arrived in the Caribbean. This voyage marked the beginning of sustained contact between Europe and the Americas, changing world history forever. Columbus completed 4 voyages across the Atlantic and helped establish regular contact between Europe and the Americas. His expeditions contributed to what historians call the Columbian Exchange, the movement of plants, animals, foods, diseases, technologies, and ideas between the Eastern and Western hemispheres. These exchanges transformed agriculture, economies, populations, and cultures around the world. And regardless of how one judges Columbus personally, there's no doubt that his voyages marked a turning point in global history. Before European arrival, the Caribbean was home to indigenous peoples, including the Taíno. The Taíno lived in organized communities, farmed crops such as cassava, fished, traded with neighboring islands, and had rich cultural and spiritual traditions. Columbus initially described many of them as friendly and generous. However, the relationship between Europeans and the indigenous peoples quickly changed, as demands for gold, labor, and colonial expansion grew. As governor of the Spanish colony on Hispaniola, Columbus oversaw policies that forced many indigenous peoples into labor and tribute systems. Historical records describe harsh punishments, violence, and widespread suffering. Some of these reports came from people living at the time, including Spanish officials and the priest Bartolomé de las Casas, although historians continue to discuss the reliability and scope of some accounts. What is clear is that many indigenous communities experienced enormous hardship during this period, and disease introduced from Europe also caused devastating population losses. What question historians often ask is whether Columbus behaved differently from other European leaders of his era. Violence, conquest, and forced labor were common during the age of exploration. Columbus was not the only explorer or colonial governor responsible for these practices. However, understanding historical context does not erase the suffering that occurred. Historians generally agree that we should examine both the standards of the time and the human consequences of those actions. Today, Christopher Columbus remains a symbol of 2 very different historical narratives. Some people honor him for opening a new chapter in world history and celebrate Columbus Day, particularly within many Italian American communities. Others believe his actions represent the beginning of centuries of colonization and indigenous suffering. Many communities now observe Indigenous Peoples Day instead, and the debate reflects differing views about how society should remember the past. Most modern historians avoid describing Columbus as simply a hero or simply a villain. Instead, they acknowledge that he was an exceptionally important historical figure whose voyages reshaped the world. At the same time, they recognize that his leadership contributed to violence, exploitation, and lasting harm to many indigenous peoples. History is often complex, and Columbus is one of its clearest examples. Christopher Columbus changed the course of world history. His voyages connected continents in ways that transformed civilization, but they also began a period that brought conquest, disease, slavery, and profound suffering to many indigenous peoples. Understanding Columbus requires us to look honestly at both sides of his legacy. Rather than choosing simple heroes or villains, history challenges us to learn from the past in all its complexity. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to the Vigg Archive.